My grandmother healed my great grandmother healed my grandmother of polio. My grandmother healed my mother of her. My mother was born, I don't know, she was almost 4 months premature.
Mm.
And, my grandmother had been told this child is not going to live. And my grandmother's perspective was, of course she is. Of course she is. And they cared for my mother in the medicine ways, the natural healing, herbal and spiritual medicine ways. And my mother was born very young, and she is a very, very, very unique soul. She's like the oldest virgin spirit I've ever known or heard of. There's something about her that's just, her countenance is just clean and beautiful and young.
Mm.
Um, she looks younger than me. She's just amazing. But through them, herbalism, spiritual healing, um, traditional midwifery, um, addressing matters of the body, all were passed to me. And then, as I said, before I ever was the person implementing these tools, I was the patient under those
Mhm.
tools. I would not be here without those things for sure. They told my mother in her pregnancy with me that I would not survive. They told her I wouldn't live to be a year old. They told her I would not live to be four. Then they said she would never come into her menstrual cycle. Then they said I would never have children. And then if I ever tried to have children, I would die in the process. I've heard all the things. They've told my family this, the physicians have told my family all these things. And my family's perspective is, okay, to the plants we go. It was my great grandmother who taught my oldest aunt um, the plants, and I learned them from her. So I spent many years just with my great aunts and my great grandmother, learning the medicines, learning how to care for people, learning all those things. It's a long list, and I'm extremely grateful for them. So I'm called Za'Yn LittleStorm Muhammad, um, and my family lineage, African, African American, Indigenous American Indian bloodlines. That's, I like to say, blackety black, black people from right here in the DMV, sort of passaging back into the Carolinas and the Carolina Islands. And
Mm.
then before that, in that place is where the indigenous bloodline comes together. That's Yamasee and Shawnee people.
Mm.
Then before that, going out another four generations takes us into Cameroon, the Bamileke people. So all of them along that whole course, that's both my paternal, and paternal bloodlines. All of those people have people in them who practice the medicines of varying kinds. So the Wellspring Academy is its name. And in the academy, we teach traditional herbalism, which is that's a really big basket full of a bunch of things, because the traditional herbalist um, cannot be separated from spiritual awareness, because you just need to, even if just to know the spirit of the plants, you cannot disintegrate those two things. So there's that part. There's the programming around learning herbalism. There is traditional mind body healing. There's clinical herbalism. There's herbs for birth work, because the midwife in me is, I like to support the doulas and the childbirth educators and even the midwives to know herbs well. And we do a lot of work in food as medicine, herbs for healing, personal development. That's that rite of passage part for both women and for men. We have a young herbalist, that's my daughter, who's 19, who also does um, training for children. So she helps children, and particularly young girls, to come into their menarche time, or their blood rights, as I refer to it. So she's also teaching and sharing her experience as a young woman. So there's lots of spaces. Oh, we have a place inside of the academy called Apex Sensual Alchemy. So this is teaching really the Taoist practice around the relationship of sensuality, sexuality, and spirituality, which gets us through menopause healing, and through addressing matters of prostate health and ED, and all matters related to sensuality and sexuality inside of Apex. So, and the list goes on.
Gotcha.
Kundalini, yoga, and all kinds of things.
And is this is a quote real community versus uh, a virtual with people
It's
teleporting?
hybrid. There's some people
Hybrid. Oh, good.
who
So there are
are
ways
on
for people
the,
that are outside the physical community to
yeah.
connect.
Yeah, and we take we go on excursions, so to foreign lands, tracking the medicine and the healers. So it's both local to Maryland as well as virtual, and we we go places. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you're taking a field trip to the coast of Maine
Yes.
to learn
We're going
about
to the coast of Maine
sea
to
moss.
do some work in sea moss, and we have traveled to Ghana and Nigeria, and have a couple other places coming up. Yeah, we'll be in Costa Rica and Brazil, and soon Europe, hopefully.
I think you mentioned Senegal earlier when we were
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah, Senegal is home to is one of my dad's homes. He loves being there. So I had the opportunity to go actually when in need of spiritual healing and support. My dad took me to Senegal. So from that perspective, I had an opportunity to be worked on by the medicine people there. And I just love the community that he's a part of there. In my family, my mom is the person who really holds the most genteel part of our practice, which is just caring for people, physically caring for people, nurturing them. And like she's been responsible for people who would be considered differently abled, people who, in a time when the world usually referred to them as having learning disabilities. My mother is the person who cared for them. She started working in that field very young and stayed in it until she was 70
Hmm.
and retired from that work. She takes care of elders, she takes care of children who are differently abled. She's a nurturer of the body. Where my biological grandmother, maternal grandmother, taught me fasting. She was the one who had the clear discipline about what is food and what is not food, what
Mm.
the time to eat, the time not to eat, the way to build your relationship with nourishing the body. She taught me that. This is a woman I never in my, she's an ancestor now, but never in my life have I seen her have a plate that was bigger than what we refer to as a saucer. I've never seen her have a full plate. Her plate was a saucer. And she would always say, people, especially women, are going to eat themselves into the grave. And so it was her preparing my plates and teaching me to prepare the plates and listening to how she nurtured her husband, who was a hungry jack man, you know what I mean, who needed a plate the size of the table, it seemed, but the times when she would support him to be not eating and how she would prepare his food so that he would be well. He also is an ancestor, but he also, in his time on the planet, was the Reverend Dr. Thomas Pear, a, a a pastor, but a physician with the spirit. He really, really, really was. And he taught me sacred text, all of them. Where he was a Christian reverend, he gave me all the sacred texts. I read, Torah, I read Bible, I read Quran, I read Bhagavad Gita, I read all the sacred texts, all sitting in his lap, even though his practice was this way. Things that he did with me, I don't want to, I could talk about this forever. So don't, feel free to interrupt and pivot at any time.
He was a
But
deep, deep, deep scholar.
yes, yes, he gave me so
Wow.
much. So throughout my life, then there's all the godparents. I was in like absolutely not raised with just my biological family. It
Hmm.
would be, I'd be completely remiss to not talk about them as parents to me because they guided, protected, they took care of me in every way, every single way. The one that I refer to as my dad, he's somebody, he's got biological children. He's somebody's a husband, all those things, but he cared for me on par with a just the best of fathers. And it was because he took care of my spiritual life. That thing I talked about happening with my head,
Hmm.
he's the person who taught me how to take care of myself. He's the person who taught me to study myself as an instrument and to know my instrument, talking about it from my inner self, to know my instrument, to know when it needs tuning and know when I haven't given it what it needs.
Mm.
He taught me how to be a spiritual executive of my own faculties. His name is Aidu. And there will never be a place that I will go, I will not honor what he gave me. And the level of, because in doing this work, I always say people want to be more spiritual. People always say they want to be more spiritual, but they don't want to deal with spirits.
Yeah.
They don't want to know, what happens in the inner workings of the soul and the realms of souls. But he is one who made me understand what I didn't know, and protected me as I passed from realm to realm, being just trying to be whatever I am. And that's the language I always use. Is I actually don't even know what I am. It's
Hmm.
beyond me. But what I do know is that I have the capacity to create what I want to see in my world. And in putting my hands on people or putting my mind on people, what that I am not the healer, but that I am supporting people to access healing, to access their inner capacity to be healed. That all is the wisdom of my dad, who I'm forever grateful for. But one of the things he told me is that he said, the reason why psychiatrists, um, no, he said, healers almost always end up needing psychiatrists, because this version of healers, they learned it in a class somewhere, but they didn't learn in that class how to hold their own countenance, how to make a separation in the space between themselves and the work. They immediately are drawing all of the client's energy into themselves, and they believe that they're the thing that's healing the person. And because they believe that, they interconnect themselves into the person's sickness in a way that's inextricable, that you can't separate yourself from at the end. So then they end up unwell. So they end up needing help here first.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that, I believe, happens because they go into these spaces, they pick up all the credentials that they can, and they start messing around in something as if it's a tinker toy, not realizing that it is energy. It is real. It's a living thing unto itself. A person's dis-ease or illness, it's a living thing unto itself, separate and apart from the person. It's a thing. If you don't know how to work with that thing without connecting into it, then you're going to be unwell in a way that, give it some years and you're going to feel it. And so he always would talk about that, how the healers and even the psychiatrists over time really need cleansing spaces. They need spaces to separate themselves from the work that they've done. And when you're in apprenticeship, you learn the difference between yourself and your client, because you're watching someone do it. You're watching her do it. You see that she's not confused about the fact that that's that person and their body, and her body is here and she's working in her space. You don't learn that in your average class space, and you're not around long enough to absorb it or integrate that information. But in apprenticeship, you are.
Before we started the formal part of the interview, you were talking about the idea of apprenticeship
Yeah.
versus reading a book, taking a course, getting a degree. Could you talk a little bit? Because it sounds like this was a complete immersion into this world, not just learning a few things here and there.
Yeah, yeah. I actually I don't have a life separate from the apprenticeship model, because I think that people are drawn to this work, this healing work, because they needed it themselves.
Mm,
I think that they are the ideal herbalist because they needed herbs.
mm,
I think that's the ideal one. Not that there are others, not that people didn't come across and go, oh my gosh, that's so cool, I want to learn it. That also happens. But I think there's something different in the person who needed it. The person whose head required it in order to be grounded or be well. So in that way, the only way that person is going to really get what they need, in my opinion, is because they find a person who's going to give it to them, a person who's going to care for them. While you're being worked on in apprenticeship model, while you're being worked on because you need
mm,
help, your work is to help the person who's working on you. So you might have to go out and collect the herbs. You might actually be the one who's just taking care of their little ones, taking care of their children while they're preparing the medicines for you. You
mm,
might be the person who goes out to run the errands so that they can make a space for you to be well when you return. You might be the one who's responsible for taking care of their administrative tasks. It could be anything.
mhm,
It
mhm.
could be anything.
Hmm.
while that person is saving your life. And under that, inside of that relationship, you begin to learn something. You begin to learn stuff that you weren't even asking for because you're watching them in their life. You're watching how they manage their children. You're watching how they're managing their affairs. You're watching how they balance their work as a helper with how they take care of their family, how they do that and accept and receive you and take care of you, like all those things together. And it takes years. It's, I don't care how long or how quickly you could have gone through a class for this, you're
Hmm.
not going to know what the person knows who apprenticed for this.
Hmm.
You won't know. You're not equally yoked, you and the person who did it from a sort of clinical class perspective. That has its honors unto itself. I would never speak poorly of it. But the apprentice is, it's a learning while doing and being kind of reality. You are doing it and being it. And the cool thing about that is that the preceptor, the person who ushered you through, they'll never leave you. They will, you'll never have a client that they aren't paying attention to. Where once you have this like certification kind of process, once you're done paying or not paying, like you didn't pay, they're done with you. They might put you in a learning portal community, but they're not the preceptor. That person paying attention to you and your clients for the rest of your life. They will take care of you while you take care of people, as long as you're living in alignment with their principle and you're executing their practices in a way that aligns with their belief system and the way they gave it to you. Yeah. So I don't want to be anywhere outside of apprenticeship ever. And I raised my own community students in apprenticeship model, which requires patience and discipline and forthrightness. You don't last long in that space being inauthentic. You don't last long in the apprenticeship model, being one who will elbow out others for the information. It's not a space for that. It won't sustain you like that. You should be in a classroom of a different kind,
Yeah.
where it just doesn't work like that. So yeah, I love the apprenticeship model. I believe wholeheartedly that the best of our ancestral healers, the best of them had an apprentice with them, somebody who assisted them and allowed them to go further in the healing work for the community. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's very practical because
Yeah.
if you're trying to go further and then you have to worry about running an errand to the
Yes.
post office, that's a half hour you've just lost. And
You just lost that
you
time. Meanwhile, you're brewing something that needs your
right.
attention. Yeah.
And your apprentice can do it, won't kill them, and
That's it.
then now you have a little more energy for them. And
Yes.
there's so many attitudinal and spiritual and experiential things that
Yeah.
if you think you can learn them in a workshop, there's just no way. It almost
No.
reminds. I'm trying to think of an analogy. It's like you can sit in a restaurant and the food's being served, and the door opens every now and then. You kind of get a peek at what's going on in there. Maybe you've read a book or seen a documentary on the chef, but being in the kitchen
Yes.
for
That's
months.
the thing.
And and it's a broad experience. It's
Mhm.
not just, oh, learn how to cut carrots. It's,
Right.
hey, dealing with the temperaments of the different
Yeah.
people and working with the guys that come with the vegetables, learning how to, there's a
Mhm.
million and one things to learn that could never fit into a classroom. Not that there's anything wrong with
Sure.
classrooms, as I
Yeah,
know you.
it has its place. It reminds me of an experience I had recently when doing some drywall work, actually, just tidying up some drywall in a room. The contractor was there and his method was something I'd never seen before. And I was like, just staring over his shoulder. And he's like, he asked me, he's like, are you interested in this kind of work? And I was like, I'm just interested in everything. And he's like, he just passed over the spackle to me. And I was like, yes, yes. And I just started doing what he was doing. And he said, yeah, people don't want to do anything. They just want to watch stuff and then become recognized as one who knows how. And I love that the moment I handed you this thing, you were just ready to go at it. And that brought out a lot for me. It made me remember that not every person who has a skill wants to impart the skill on someone else. Not everybody wants to see their students become the thing because their inner work is not up to par yet. Their identity is so tied to being the thing that they actually don't want to see another person potentially be that thing better than them.
Right.
So being a preceptor or being the teacher in that perspective, it makes you have to be real clean and real clear about yourself
Mhm.
because you have to be ready to see what your apprentice or student is, what their inherent talent is, what they do, and what
Mhm.
they can do, and be willing to support them to come up to doing that thing, even if they're going to do it so much better than you. In my upbringing, elder and apprentice go together. The elder should not reach 80 without an apprentice
Oh,
because
so
it's a
true.
process of supporting the elder and pouring over into the apprentice. It's a cycle that's essential. I know that I would not know what I know or be whatever I am. And that's really the way I describe it is I don't know what I am, but whatever I am, it's inherent and it's been cultivated. And from, putting my hands on a person and supporting that person to come back into their body in a full and complete way, to supporting people just by way of conversation to understand and anchor themselves in their life experience and to understand the capacity to create their life experience. Those are all things that are they're essential parts of who I am. But I could not do this without the elders that undergird me. I just could not. I would not be well because they made me, and it's my responsibility to carry that work forward in a way that's natural for me.
So far, what you've described are, for lack of a better word, attitudinal things, spiritual things,
Mhm.
uh, life wisdom,
Mhm.
and but of course you also operate an apothecary,
Sure.
and you have quite a bit of specialized knowledge about plants and plant
Yeah,
medicine as well.
I do. Yeah, I learned those things from first being a patient to these plants. I being conceived in the time that I was and experiencing the things that I was experiencing in my brain, my soul, and my body.
Mm.
It made me have to be treated by way of natural healing. My grandmother, my great grandmother, and my great great grandmother, all people who were in those practices one way or the other. I always say to, students and godchildren, I have a ton of them. I'm godmother to a bunch of people. I always say I'm not going to be the one that my children turn to for work. They're not going to for healing. They're not going to turn to me because I'm their mother. My daughters are going to turn to someone in this greater community because they will have built a relationship with somebody, and they will want to have a safe place that they can go for support and for guidance and that kind of thing. So yeah, I want all the apprentices to be fantastic because one of them is going to work on me. The day is going to come when I'm not going to be working on me. Somebody else in this community is going to have to take care of me. And if I haven't prepared people with what I have and haven't helped them to be interconnected with people who have talents, skills, and spiritual capacities beyond my own, who's going to fix me when the day comes that I need to be made well?
Dr. Z, I want to thank you again. And the name of your organization is Wellspring Natural Living,
Yes.
and it's
The
based.
Wellspring Natural Living.
I'm sorry,
The
the
Wellspring
Well, the
Natural
Well,
Living.
the
Mm-hmm.
Wellspring,
That's right.
and that's in Clinton, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And people can find out more by visiting the internet, the magic of the internet, and learn
That's
more.
right. What
Yeah.
a place. That's
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate you. Have a good one.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.